child living within a home bereft of much love, fantasy stories were a wonderful thing to Rosine. She believed in one story in particular, one about an elf child. Let me tell you of a tale. The tale of Peekaf. Peekaf, the Outcast. In a village, a boy had red eyes and pointy ears. He had loving parents, human parents, but he was bullied by the village children for his appearance. Peekaf grew to hate where he lived, and longed for something else. Given his appearance, he thought there was no way he belonged amongst humans. The boy heard about a place in the forest, a place where elves had lived, and was deemed forbidden by the adults. Peekaf thought, if he looked so strange, he had to be one of the elves. He just had to be. One night, the boy fled from his home village and made for that place in the forest to search for his real parents. When he arrived, there were elves, real as could be. They were so small, they made their homes in the trees. Just like him, their eyes were red and their ears were pointy. However, the elves denied the boy's relation to them, for he lacked the wings they used to fly with much pride. One elf told the boy of a time when a man and a woman carried a baby into the forest who was ill and dying. They loved their son very much and pleaded desperately for his life to be spared. The elves granted their wish with magic, but in exchange, his appearance was altered to look half-elf. Hearing this, Peekaf rushed home to those who were his real parents all along, leaking tears and filled with regrets. When he returned home, a terrible reality struck. There was no home, and there were no parents. For somehow, during his seemingly short time in the forest, 100 years had passed, and home had vanished. Peekaf the outcast from his dreams to be an elf, and now from his family. He cried and cried, his red eyes swollen even redder. Rosine loved this story, but she knew it to be make-believe, for the tale she truly believed in was the one about the Queen of the Elves, one only she knew. Rosine saw herself as just like Peekaf, except for one key difference. She really was an elf. To Rosine, that was her reality, that was her destiny. Pain. Night after night. Pain. It wasn't just her that received beatings, but her human mother as well. Her human father resented her mother for bearing a child with another man, and despised Rosine for being that child. That man was long gone, the one who forced himself onto her mother. And so, beatings. To her father, Rosine was only good for two things: doing chores and receiving his anger. The thought that she was never meant to be born, that her existence was the result of a human committing a terrible sin, to Rosine, this couldn't be her reality. It just couldn't. She was special. Her human form, it was temporary. And the day she finally found her real home, the land of the elves, that is when her true beauty would awaken. She would sprout wings, and her complexion would become greater than that of any human. She would play in the wilderness, more in the way of a boy than any girl. In the woods and in the streams, she played. But she wasn't alone. Jill, a girl who was 4 years younger than her, lived across the street, and she would go with Rosine into the wilderness to play. She caught small bugs and animals to show off to Jill. What fun it was to have a friend to play with and share her interests with. Rosine liked to collect. She liked to collect whatever she could find, things most people, even other children, would consider junk. Once, she found an egg with human facial features. What a fantastical and otherworldly thing, just like from a fairy tale. This was her most prized thing. Nothing else she had was anything like it. Rosine and Jill played very frequently, until the sun had started to set. Rosine didn't think about the reason too hard, and she never told Jill this, but it was so she could stay away from home for as long as possible. But sleeping in the woods was far, far too scary, so she had to return eventually. Rosine could no longer bear the beatings from her father, nor the sight of her mother being smacked any longer. There was something greater out there for her. She just knew it. Just like the tale of Peekaf. Only her story would have a happy ending. Rosine remembered talk of a Misty Valley far, far away, a place where elves had once resided. What was most important to her was the idea that this was the land of the elves, and she didn't put too much thought into the fact that there were no longer any elves living there. So she decided, even though there was a torrential downpour, this had to be the night. She didn't care. She had to leave tonight to find the Misty Valley. There were two things she had to do before departing on her adventure. First, she needed to bring that one thing, her egg, the one with the face of a human. If anything, that, most of all. And secondly, she had to say goodbye to Jill, her one and only friend. So, on her way out of the village, she tossed a pebble at the window of Jill's bedroom, and with a smile on her face, she told her goodbye, goodbye forever. Not looking back and continuing to smile, Rosine headed in the direction of the Misty Valley, the land of the elves. Jill had shouted something out her window, but Rosine either couldn't hear her through the rain, or tried not to hear. She made it. This had to be it. The Misty Valley. Just being here filled Rosine with extravagant joy and a sense of freedom. The elves of her dreams would come out any second to greet her. She had but to wait, and waited she did. For days, she waited. Many, many days. Forever, she waited. But no elves had come. Over time, Rosine couldn't lie to herself any longer. Everything she kept bottled up inside eventually came out on their own and shattered her fantasies. The fact that she was a child born because of a sin, the real reason she used to play for so long every day, and the fact that elves weren't real. And if they were, they certainly no longer lived here. And something else she didn't like invaded her world. Two disturbingly familiar figures, her human parents. Her mother was the first one to meet her, crying and showing nothing but affection and worry for her. But to Rosine, her mother's appearance was just another grim reminder of reality. She didn't hate her, but there were too many awful things surrounding her mother that made her presence more distressing than comforting. But what came next was far worse, a fist to her face. Apparently, her disappearance had delayed the harvest for the village, since so many people had looked for her for so long, and her father made a point of it, with his beatings. He screamed so close to her face he could have taken a bite out of her. He mocked her and asked if there were any elves here in the valley, and that she was far too old to believe in such superstitions. Superstitions? No, it was real. It had to be, because reality was something that Rosine could never accept. But it kept forcing its way into her mind by way of her father's fist. And it only continued to do so once her mother pleaded that he stop, and he directed his rage to her. Her own beatings, and watching her mother receive them too. This was just like back at home. But why? Why had the real world invaded her fantasy world? This wasn't right. She didn't need this. The valley was supposed to be her reality. It was her birthright, to be among the elves, and to be one herself. Rosine was owed this, simply for the fact that she existed. Everything else was fake, and shouldn't exist. Shouldn't exist. Go away. Everything just go away. Her egg, her most valuable thing, cried and screamed along with her. And then, as if summoned by their cries, the heavens split apart, and the world around her changed. It was something indescribable, nothing she could have ever imagined on her own. It was like being in a whole other world, one that had its own rules and way of being, and in that world were four figures, beings with great presence that could only be described as devils. But to Rosine, these were angels, sent from the heavens to save her from this horrible, fake world that she was born into. Her parents screamed in horror as they were bound by arms with faces. Her heart began to quake. Not in terror or dread, but in ecstasy, the fantastical, interacting with the familiar and the horrible, and making it look powerless and scared. That was wonderful. Truly wonderful. The angels had promised her the things of her greatest dreams. They told her that she could be whatever she wanted, what she was always meant to be. They only asked for one thing in return, a sacrifice. For nothing of such extravagance could be gained without a heavy price. And so, they suggested, her parents, if she could offer their souls to the swirling mass of damnation beyond the void, she would have it. Everything she ever wanted. Beauty, power, kinship, wings. Those are what she would gain. With wide eyes and a gaping jaw, and an invocation of doom, she offered up her parents. And what came next was a complete transformation of her being. Her fragile skin hardened as her strength grew. Stemming from beneath the skin, her wings began to rise, soon to take flight. The current phase passes as the next begins, on her way to open up and rise. Larva to fly. She lost her humanity, and she felt like she lost something else too. Something she perhaps would have preferred not to lose. But by the time it was gone, she couldn't remember what it was. But perhaps she had already lost it before her transformation. She had soared high into the sky, so high she might have discovered another planet if she kept going, but the view below was enough for her. The world is seen by birds and winged elves. She could look down on the sick world from a new perspective and see its beauty for all it was, without humans. This is what she wanted to see when she played in the woods, but there was nothing quite like this. This view was a sign of her power, finally. Now, it was time to save the children of the world. She had the power to do it, to turn human children into beautiful elves. Rosine would go on to attack human villages and save the children from their mortal coils. Many years had passed. Rosine created paradise in the Misty Valley, the land of the elves. Her and the elves would play all day, and never grow hungry, and never go cold. Eventually, she started saving the children of the village she came from. One by one, she would take them home and turn them into elves. Everything was going as well as it had in the other villages, until one day, a new horror appeared. One unlike that of which she had ever faced before. The Black Swordsman, the worst monster of all, a human adult. He had slaughtered her elf friends and burned them like animals. Rosine noticed a face which may have been familiar to her. The face of someone from her past as a human, Jill. She was with the Black Swordsman, that dirty adult. Had he seduced her with his cunning? Was Jill in love with him? She retreated and needed time to think about what had happened. After seeing her face again, Rosine realized that Jill was the child she needed to save most of all. She was her one light of positivity when she was a human. She owed Jill, but had she lost her to that Black Swordsman? No. Jill was her friend back then, and she will be her friend now. After all, the hero of the story needs a damsel to save from the dragon. Rosine eventually found Jill again, and wanted to catch up and show off her new discovery, just as she did all those years ago. But he came. That Black Swordsman. The devil had it out for Rosine, but she wasn't gonna go down without a fight. She snatched Jill away and took her back to the Misty Valley. She showed Jill the view that had once made her aware of just how powerful she was. Then, when they came home, she showed Jill how comfortable and fun it was to be an elf. No more pain from humans, no more starving or sleeping in the cold. Rosine spent so much time as a human, showing off amazing things to her friend, and this was the most amazing thing of all. She had of course planned to turn Jill into an elf, but she was scared. It was only natural. Rosine was definitely scared at first, when the angels appeared and offered her the same thing. But she just had to go through with it, and she was glad she did. Jill had to be just as willing as she was, for she suffers as a human all the same. It happened again. The Black Swordsman came. He invaded paradise. Another human adult had forced their way into Rosine's reality to try to take away her birthright, and there was no egg or angels to save her this time. If Rosine wanted to keep her dream alive, she had to fight tooth and nail for it. The Black Swordsman burned through her friends, turning them into mincemeat and painting the environment with their insides. And he did it all with a smile. Bastard! Filthy human, dirty adult. No matter what she threw at him, that monster kept coming back and smiling wider than ever. This was the face of the devil himself. She was sure of it. Rosine needed more power to fight this fire demon from hell. She decided to go to the next stage, to become a monster, to fight a monster. He continued to burn her home and her friends. There was no going back. At this rate, everything would be lost. But with her wings, she had boundless power. She could just start anew somewhere else. Just like before, with her human parents. This wouldn't be the end. This was just potential for another beginning. That's all it was. So bring it on, human. Her new form allowed her even greater speeds than before, and more powerful strikes. He may be a devil, but he's still human. He will die here, and this temporary nightmare will be over. Her propulsion shook the skies like thunder, and her strike shocked like lightning. This man would only be able to take so much more. This last strike hadn't killed him. It got his face closer to hers, and she could see why Jill might fall for him. But under that handsome face was the perverted soul of an adult. It was a rush like no other, having an adult at her mercy. The feeling of superiority over those who used to make her feel so small and helpless. She took him up to her sacred realm, high in the sky, where no human could ordinarily reach. Up here, she would fly at full speed, tear his weak body to shreds. A glint of life appeared in his eyes, and his metallic left arm turned into a cannon, which fired into her lower half and sent Rosine into a daze for a moment, causing them both to fall all the way back down to the ground. Her dear Jill was safe. Even amongst this cold inferno, which used to be Rosine's home, she promised to her, face to face, that this was the start of the two of them, spending forever together in peace. But when she was distracted in another one of her fantasies, reality struck her in the back by way of an enormous lump of iron. This heartless monster used her moment of love and vulnerability as an opportunity to strike. When she flew away, she had no choice but to take him with her, and that heavy weapon was still stuck inside her body. This human was evil incarnate, not just a messenger or one of its lackeys, but the very essence of evil itself. A human must never be allowed to cause pain for an elf. With every ounce of her strength, she shook off the bastard, weapon in hand. As he hopelessly limped around in the sky, she used this as her chance to impale him, straight for the head, the source of his wicked thoughts. He shouldn't exist. He should just go away. Just go away. Forever. She did it. She struck him in the head with her horn. What's this? The horn was in his mouth, and he used his teeth to bite down on and shatter it. The next thing she knew, that lump of iron struck her head on. There was no coming back from this. This had been the deadliest blow she'd taken thus far. Reality won. There was no land of the elves. There were no wings. It was just another one of her fantasies. The tale of Peekaf, the tale of the Queen of the Elves. That's all they were. Tales. Silly stories made up by sad, lonely children. Superstitions. There was one elf left. One that wasn't hers. One who had stayed by Jill's side ever since she saw her back at the village. She thought him to be an imposter, something made up by the real world, which she saw as fake for so long. But in this moment, she realized he really was the real deal, a true elf. He told her that the Misty Valley really had been a home to elves once, long ago. Jill had been the lucky duck to find a real elf. Good for her. So, she could live her life without having to worry. And that wasn't a fantasy. Rosine got back up and made for the heavens, one last time. She was finally awake. She realized she'd been out playing too long. She had to get back home and have dinner with Mother and Father. They must have been worried sick. She would go back home and have a wonderful time. Or perhaps that was just another one of her fantasies.